My Ibex 450 has been hiding over here in the corner of my garage, getting unridden for a while because I need a new skid plate. I have just had the OEM skid plate, which comes on the bike from the factory, and it's not much more than a thin piece of aluminum. It's really thin, it doesn't provide a whole lot of protection, so it's time to install a new skid plate that just came out from Rocky Mountain. It's their Tusk brand skid plate. So we're gonna go ahead and get that unboxed and install it. It comes packaged very nicely. And it does include an auxiliary bracket. We'll figure out where that goes once I read the instructions. This is powder coated silver, and it's got their slit skid plate on the bottom. Ooh, I really like that. That's made out of UMHW, I think that's what it's called, plastic. So it gives it a nice glide finish if you're hopping over logs or doing crazy things like that with your dual sport or adventure bike. Little bag includes the instruction sheet and all of our hardware, and it is all torque style bolts with a great big flanged head on them, so that's kind of a nice feature. And all of those bolts appear to be the same length, although some of them are smaller diameter with a finer thread pitch. They are M8 and M6, all 20 millimeters long. We have 5 M6s and 6 M8s. Here's the instruction sheet, and one of the first things it says under installation instructions is loose manufacturing tolerances have been noticed in the tube structure the skid plate is bolting to. I have noticed that myself, and a lot of other people have noticed that as well on the various Ibex and MT450 discussion groups that I've been involved in. So people will either have to use bar clamp or spreaders, or possibly ratchet straps in some cases to pull the tubes together to get everything to line up. So that doesn't seem to be unique to any skid plate or any specific bike. So we got a lot of nice protection under the rear of the engine. It goes back under the exhaust, so that's a nice feature as well. And we got good protection up here on the side, and same thing in the front. And then we have a little L-shaped cutout right there on the bracket, which indicates the left side of the bike. And here it is right here. And here's the bracket, and this indicates the left side. We have a little cutout of an L, letter L right there. Well, let's take a closer look at this before I install it. These are some very nice looking welds here. All of these are the threads from the screws that hold the glide plate to the actual metal. All of the screw holes are slotted, which is a nice touch to account for manufacturing tolerances of the bike and the frame and everything. Having manufacturing tolerances such that you might have to make some adjustments to things to get a skid plate to mount up isn't uncommon. The Tenere 700 that I had the same issue with the cradles that go underneath the engine, which the skid plate bolted to. And here we can see the slotted mounting screws to account for different tolerances for the manufacturing of the bike. This is looking at the bottom of it, and this is the front here. First thing the instructions call for is to loosely mount the bracket to the skid plate. And like everything else that I bolt up to my bike, and the instructions actually mention this as well, is to use some blue thread lock. I usually like to use Permatex brand gel style thread lock. I lost my tube of it though. I don't know what happened to it. So this is something that came with something else that I bought. It's liquid style, so we're just going to squirt a little bit of it on the bolt here. It's really not much more than just a sample. And here's a sign of a lot of care and effort taking to when something is manufactured and powder coated, is the threads do not have powder coat in them, which is a good thing. And that screw actually recesses into the glide plate on the bottom. There's a hole that the head of the screw goes into. So what we're going to do next is hold the skid plate up to the bike and attach the front two bolts up here. Those are the M8 bolts. And then we're going to loosely thread in 2 more bolts to the frame of the motorcycle. That is also shown in figure 2. That will be back here. And then we'll take our 4 remaining bolts and bolt 2 on each side. Get my hand out of the way here so it goes there and there. And those are the 2 bolts that originally held in the little plastic guards to protect the side of the engine. So our front 2 bolts go here and here. Due to the size of the skid plate, and it's going to be really awkward to hold that up with working on this bike solo and trying to thread the bolts in, I'm actually sitting it on my little floor jack. So we're going to raise that up into place. And the U-shaped bracket in the back, that actually bolts up way back here behind the engine, probably at the point where the factory or maybe an aftermarket center stand would bolt up. I gave up fighting with the bike on the floor, so I put it up on my lift. So the first thing I want to do before I mount anything is take one of the bolts and run it into this point behind the side stand, which is where this bracket bolts up to, and then do the same thing on the other side, just to make sure that those bolts are going to thread in freely and that we aren't having a cross thread situation or anything like that. I've already pulled off the factory skid plate, so I don't need to do that with this hole, that one, or these 2. And I have already kind of taken a ratchet strap and squished these 2 bars, this down tube here and that one over there, pulled them together a little bit to get everything to line up. I've got a little scissor style lift stand here that we're going to use to raise the skid plate up in place, because it's kind of hard to hold this when I'm working on this bike solo. Then we're going to go ahead and thread these 2 mounting bolts in. We're just going to thread the bolts in loosely and then move to some of the other bolts. And this is why you want to leave that bolt that bolts the skid plate to this bracket loose, so that you can manipulate this to get the bolt installed here on these 2 rear mounting points. I swung the side stand down to get easier access to that other bolt. Next up is this one here. I did have to loosen these bolts just a little bit and then use the lift to bias these 2 bolts higher in the notch, or basically push the front of the skid plate up in order for these to get threaded in correctly. So it's just going to take a little bit of trickery and manipulation of things to get the skid plate to fit. And like I said earlier in this video, it's not unique to this bike. Overall, the skid plate looks really nice. I like that you can still get access to the oil filter as well as the oil drain plug without having to remove the skid plate. A lot of skid plates aren't like that, And that's a huge drawback in my mind, because every time you take these bolts out and put them back in, you run the risk of cross-threading it or just degrading the threads over time. One of the things that I found to be the easiest is once I started tightening all the bolts up, I tightened these up first, and then these, and then this one, and then that one. I did that on both sides. So another tip is to loosen these bolts back here. A person could also loosen these up here, but it's tough to get a tool in there because you don't have a lot of clearance between the side fairing shroud and those bolt heads. And then if you have crash bars on, then it's not likely that loosening those is going to allow anything to move anyway. And then on the other side, you have a radiator hose that blocks access to that one. But I did find it easier just to loosen these two at the bottom, one on each side. I do really like this skid plate. I had no idea that it was going to come with the glide plate on the bottom. That is a very nice feature.